After the real young master finally returned, the fake heir started bragging that he had been dating the daughter of one of the most powerful families in the capital. He looked straight at me and laughed, claiming that I had always believed she could recognize the real him. But, according to him, she had been completely fooled by his act. Then, just to rub salt into the wound, he deliberately showed me the strawberry mark she had left on him. That was the moment I finally gave up on everything. I took the money and decided to walk away for good. But one day, before I was supposed to leave, my car was suddenly forced to a stop on an elevated highway. Someone blocked my path, but when I looked at them, I gave them only one warning: get out of my way. Then my adoptive father called and ordered me to come to Lansing. After that phone call, I knew something was about to happen. So, even though it was already noon, I immediately headed over. And just as I expected, my father-in-law was already looking at the young man who had taken my place in the family. Over the past year, the so-called real young master, Yi Fan, had grown ridiculously fast. He had already mastered almost every skill his family had thrown at him. He wasn't at the absolute peak yet, but he was already strong enough to avoid embarrassing himself. Ever since the real heir was found, my father-in-law had secretly been training him behind the scenes. And now, I finally understood why. My father-in-law offered me a large sum of money. He knew I understood the situation. There simply couldn't be two people living under the same identity. And with the real heir back, there was no place for the fake one. 15 years ago, on a cold and rainy night, my adoptive father had arrived in a black car. He walked into a nearly empty, poverty-stricken house. The moment his eyes landed on me, his expression changed. I looked exactly like the son he had lost. His biological son had disappeared years earlier. The loss had devastated his wife so badly that she became seriously ill. He used every connection he had to search for his missing son. But no matter how hard he searched, Yi Fan was nowhere to be found. Instead, he found me, the poor kid who happened to have almost the exact same face. And that's when he offered me a deal. He promised to pay for my education. He would also give my family enough money to completely change our lives. From that day forward, I would become the son of the powerful Yi family. I would never have to worry about starving again. I would never again sleep inside that freezing, broken-down house. And I would no longer have to watch other people live the life I could only dream about. The upper class would finally lift me out of poverty and place me at the top. Honestly, I had no reason to refuse. And now, standing in the same situation again, I heard my adoptive father's final arrangement for me. Once again, I had no real reason to refuse. My father-in-law handed me a folder containing my new identity documents. He had already prepared a completely new set of identification papers for me. After some time, he promised to personally send me away. Whether I wanted to study overseas or disappear somewhere far away, the money in the account would be more than enough to support me for the rest of my life. But then I realized what that meant for me and An Shi-yi. Our engagement would naturally be canceled as well. For the woman I had once loved, that was the moment everything stopped. The music inside the piano room suddenly ended, and a man walked out. She stared at me with a complicated expression. She accused me of taking someone else's place for all these years. And somehow, she still thought I was being greedy. She made it clear that I should stop dreaming about remaining her fiancé. My adoptive father frowned. He called my name, but I already understood everything. The fake heir's eyes turned red with emotion. He refused to accept me getting anywhere near her again. In his mind, she belonged to him, but I didn't even bother looking at him. I simply gave the real young master a cold, indifferent glance. Then I turned around and said I was leaving. I hadn't gone far from the Lan family residence when I suddenly received a call from An Shi-yi. She urgently asked where I was. Then she demanded to know exactly where I had gone. I lied and told her I was already somewhere very far away. My thoughts were a complete mess. I turned my head away from the phone. My eyes drifted toward the distant road. And then something suddenly caught my attention. A Porsche Cayenne was parked not far away. A woman's slender hand, wearing an elegant watch, rested near the window. Her hand slowly crossed into view. The windows were covered with dark tint, making it impossible to read the emotions inside. Then I heard a woman's voice through the phone. She hesitated for a moment, before finally calling out to me. Her voice sounded unusually emotional. She admitted that she really wanted to see me. The moment I opened the door and got into the car, I could tell she was already angry. She started the engine. Her expression remained cold, and she didn't say another word. I sat quietly inside the car, then looked at her and realized something was seriously wrong. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be overseas. She simply looked at me without the slightest rush, as if she had already seen through every lie I was trying to hide. She explained that she had just gotten off a flight. She had been overseas, hanging out with some friends, and that's when she happened to spot me. At first, she had simply wanted to tease me, but then she caught me lying about being far away. So instead of playing along, she decided to drag the truth out of me. I tried to end the awkward situation and asked her to drop me off by the roadside. I told her I could just take a taxi home by myself. She immediately hit the brakes and brought the car to a stop. Then, An-chi turned toward me with a look that made my excuse feel completely useless. She couldn't believe I thought she had seen me, and would still be in the mood to do anything else after finding out I had lied to her. Later that night, we arrived at the An family residence. By then, I was so exhausted that I could barely straighten my back. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was punishing me for lying to her earlier that day. She grabbed my face, then leaned closer, as if she wanted to force an answer out of me. She wanted to know why I had lied about not wanting to see her. She specifically wanted to know why I didn't want to see her. I couldn't bring myself to admit how much I actually wanted to, so I explained that I had only lied because I wanted to surprise her. I gently covered her mouth before she could say anything else. I admitted that I had already found out her flight schedule long before she came back. I never said I didn't want to see her. She stared at me silently for a long moment, as if she was trying to read everything I wasn't saying. Eventually, she pulled her gaze away from me and relaxed. Then she asked whether I was hungry. She wanted to know what I felt like eating. She even offered to cook for me herself. Then she got dressed and headed outside, apparently ready to prepare something for me. I stopped her before she could leave. She turned around and raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by how quickly I had changed my mind. She teased me, as if I had already started missing her. I forced a smile, but my heart felt heavier than ever. I promised myself that this would be the last lie I ever told her. Because soon, there might not be an us left to lie for. After dinner, I made up an excuse and quietly left the An family residence. En Shiyu didn't notice anything unusual about my behavior. He offered to drive me home, but I immediately refused. I reminded him that he had his own things to take care of. I told him I could get home by myself. He simply acknowledged it without showing much emotion. I turned around and prepared to leave. But just as I reached for the door, someone suddenly grabbed my wrist. En Shiyu's eyes locked onto mine. She suddenly suggested that we move our wedding date forward. That way, I wouldn't have to keep traveling back and forth. I froze as her grip around my wrist tightened. For a brief moment, I looked directly into her eyes. Then I quickly looked away. Even I didn't realize how much panic had slipped into my voice. I forced myself to agree, pretending that everything was completely fine. Only after that did I finally relax. She leaned casually against the door, wearing a faint, knowing smile. She wished me good night before the door slowly closed behind me. The second I was outside, every muscle in my body finally relaxed. The night wind hit me with an icy chill. It cut straight through my body and sent a shiver through every limb. As I thought about everything my adoptive father had said that day, a terrifying question suddenly crossed my mind. What would happen when the real Yi-fan finally stood in front of the people who had known me for 15 years? Would they realize immediately that he wasn't me? And if they did recognize the truth, would they simply accept it and move on? Or would everything explode into chaos? I couldn't stop imagining that scene. Just thinking about it made my throat tighten. But the moment I stepped outside, a figure suddenly rushed straight toward me. Before I could react, the first slap crashed across my face. The moment he raised his hand to strike me again, I caught his wrist mid-swing. I stared at him coldly. I warned him that if he hit me again, I would hit back. Yi-fan's eyes were already bloodshot with rage. He shoved and struggled against me. He accused me of being nothing more than a shameless fake. He demanded that I leave and stay away from them. Apparently, he thought I had become addicted to stealing things that never belonged to me. I tightened my grip around his wrist. I reminded him that my relationship with his father was a legitimate business partnership, so his accusation about me stealing his life was complete nonsense. I warned him that if he kept acting like this, I wouldn't mind having another conversation with his father about his behavior. The instant I mentioned his father, Yifan's arrogance instantly disappeared. Because when it came to his father, blood mattered. But blood wasn't everything. What mattered even more was his position and usefulness within the family. I sighed, tired of wasting my time on this. I told him that I wasn't his imaginary enemy. I had no intention of taking anything away from him. And as for An Shi-yi, I reminded him that he already knew the truth. She had never truly belonged to him in the first place, had she? Besides, the An family's influence was far greater than the Yi family's. If this turned into a real confrontation, he was the one standing on thinner ice. He didn't actually need the An family to marry into the Yi family. That alliance could happen, but only because the An family was willing to go along with it. Yifan lifted his chin confidently. To him, none of that mattered. He believed that spending enough time together would naturally create feelings. Eventually, he was convinced she would fall in love with him. I simply nodded. I wished him luck and hoped he would get exactly what he wanted. But before I left, I looked back at Yifan. I stared straight into his eyes. I reminded him that I loved spicy food. I was allergic to mangoes. I loved animals. And I enjoyed hiking. There were countless little things about me that he didn't know. But the most important difference was simple. I didn't speak with the same heavy tone or mannerisms that he used. Yifan clenched his fists. He demanded to know what I was really trying to say. I told him that if he wanted to marry An Shi-yi, he could learn all these little details about me. And most people would never realize the difference. But An Shi-yi and I had spent years together, day after day, knowing each other's habits better than anyone. If he truly wanted to take my place, then he couldn't simply pretend to be me. He would have to erase himself. He hated the fact that I had once taken his identity, so I told him to think about what taking mine would actually cost. From that point forward, he would have to start learning every detail of my lifestyle. And I asked him whether becoming someone else was really the life he wanted. Later, when An Shi-yi came to the Yi residence, I'd already moved out of my old bedroom and into the servants' quarters. That was Yifan's demand. His father didn't even bother arguing about it. He only gave Yifan a warning look, making it clear that he shouldn't push things too far. He could reclaim his identity without completely humiliating me. As for me, I honestly didn't care anymore. I packed all my belongings into my suitcase, and I didn't even bother unpacking them afterward. After all, I was leaving soon anyway. Downstairs, An Shi stood there in a long black dress. She was calmly discussing something with the Yi family. She had come today specifically to discuss our engagement. And strangely enough, her attitude seemed much more polite than usual. I walked downstairs quietly. But Yifan immediately stepped in front of me. He reminded me that I had always believed An Shi knew me extremely well. I stopped walking. Yifan smiled with obvious confidence. He announced that he was going to meet her today. Then he stared directly at me, as if he wanted to see whether he could find even the slightest doubt in my eyes. He wanted to see for himself whether An Shi-yi could actually recognize that we were two different people. Then Yifan went downstairs. Several people remained downstairs, talking. Their voices drifted faintly through the house. A few minutes later, Yifan walked out with An Shi-yi's arm linked around his. I slowly walked toward the window. An Shi-yi stepped outside. Then, for some reason, she suddenly looked upward. I immediately ducked out of sight. Yifan apparently noticed and asked her what was wrong. She calmly told him that nothing was wrong. She only thought he looked particularly handsome today. The car doors opened and closed. Then the car drove away. I closed my eyes and leaned against the wall. But I couldn't stop thinking about the faint smile on her lips. For some reason, that smile suddenly felt painfully sharp. It wasn't until late that night that Yifan finally returned. He looked ridiculously pleased with himself. He was even humming happily as he walked up the stairs. Then he deliberately kicked my suitcase. After that, he held out my phone toward me. He claimed he was giving it back. I reached out to take it, but just as my fingers were about to touch it, he suddenly pulled it away again. He sarcastically suggested that maybe there was no reason to return it after all. Then he went even further, implying that maybe there was no reason for me to exist in this family anymore either. He reminded me that his father had always refused to let me leave. According to him, the only reason was because his father was afraid that removing me would somehow cause problems. But after spending the day with An Shi, Yi Fan claimed there was clearly nothing to worry about. He smiled like a man who had just won the lottery. Then he reminded me that I supposedly loved spicy food, but he proudly explained that he had eaten extremely mild food that day. He even told me how An Shi had asked why he suddenly wanted to eat cake. His answer was shamelessly simple. Apparently, he wanted it because it would make kissing easier. He even pointed toward his lips while telling me. Then he dropped the real bombshell. He claimed that he had kissed An Shi that very day. I didn't even look at him. I simply took my phone back from his hand. My voice remained completely calm. I told him I still needed my phone. Then I told him he could leave without worrying about me. I assured him that I would collect the money my adoptive father had promised me. Yi Fan looked like he still had something else he wanted to say. I'd already dragged him out of the room. I stared at him, completely stumped. Yi Fan warned me that some things worked best when you knew when to stop. Push it too far, and people would only think I was desperately trying to cover something up. The room finally fell silent again. I picked up my phone and checked my messages. Nothing had changed since the last conversation. Then, out of nowhere, An Shiyu called me. I ignored the first call, but she immediately called again. When I finally answered, she stayed completely silent. So I broke the silence and asked what she wanted at such a late hour. Only then did An Shiyu finally speak. She admitted that she missed me. After a brief silence, she cautiously tested the waters. She wanted to know if I would go out with her. I stared out the window, thinking about it. After all, we had literally just seen each other that day. She gave a small laugh, as if my response amused her. Her reason was almost ridiculously simple. She just wanted to see me one more time. But I told her we could do it another time. I turned her down, saying I was exhausted and already in bed because, honestly, I had no intention of letting this situation get any messier. Before I could say anything else, the call ended. I stared down at my phone. It had been a long time since we'd actually met like this. I finally let out a long, tired sigh. Then I buried my face against my knees. My thoughts were a complete mess, but eventually one conclusion became impossible to ignore. An Shiyu still hadn't recognized me. Logically, that should have been good news. But for some reason, it still hurt like hell. Covering it up. That was the phrase stuck in my head. I kept turning those words over and over in my mind. Then I connected them to everything she had been doing over the past few days. Suddenly, I couldn't help laughing. She was the one desperately trying to hide the truth all along. Talk about a self-report. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Yi Fan continued taking my place and pretending to be me. Meanwhile, An Shiyu kept meeting him and going on dates with him. The wedding was officially scheduled for 2 months later. Everything was going far more smoothly than I had ever imagined. And that meant one thing. I was finally free to leave. My father-in-law handed me a plane ticket. The flight was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. He told me to leave and followed the path I had chosen. I thanked him, but I had one final request. He wanted me to stay away from anything related to social media and content creation. More importantly, I was never supposed to return to Jing City. I accepted the ticket and thanked him. But before I left, I asked if I could see my mother one last time. My father-in-law froze for a moment. Clearly, he hadn't expected me to make that request. After a brief hesitation, he finally nodded. He agreed that I should have one final chance to talk to her. 15 years ago, after Yi Fan disappeared, my mother completely broke down. The trauma damaged her mental state so badly that she was never the same again. To keep outsiders from gossiping about the family, she had been kept in a secluded villa halfway up the mountain for years. And throughout all those years, I would often visit her and simply sit there talking with her. Sometimes she was completely lucid. Other times, she was lost inside her own memories. But no matter what state she was in, she had always treated me kindly. That afternoon, I returned to the villa and saw her again. I peeled an orange for her. Then I stayed beside her and sang for a while. Just when I was about to leave, she suddenly called me back. She struggled to gesture toward me, calling me by the nickname she had always used. She wanted to know when I would come back. The moment I heard that, tears started running down my face. I promised her that we would meet again. Then I drove down from the mountain. But before I could get far, a Porsche Cayenne suddenly blocked my path. I kept both hands on the steering wheel and refused to get out. This was the last thing I expected. I had absolutely no time to prepare myself for this encounter. After all, from An Shiyu's perspective, we were practically seeing each other every single day. Then my phone started ringing like it was possessed. When I finally stepped out of the car, I realized the phone was finally back in my possession. I answered the call and my eyes immediately locked with An Shiyu standing beside the Cayenne. I stared at her like I had suddenly become some kind of monster. Was I seriously that terrifying to her? An Shiyu merely curled her lips into a faint, amused smile. She couldn't believe I was refusing to even open the door for her. Outside, the green leaves swayed gently in the wind, and somehow I ended up back inside that painfully familiar room. I honestly had no idea how things had spiraled this far. The moment An Shiyu got into the car, everything I had carefully planned immediately went completely off the rails. I tried to push her away, but she caught my wrist and forced my arm behind my back. And just like that, the situation became even more intense. For one dangerous moment, I almost lost myself in it. But the moment I saw the confusion and obsession in An Shiyu's eyes, Yifan's warning suddenly exploded back into my mind. After everything that had happened these past few days, after spending every waking moment together, I couldn't help wondering if she had started feeling the same way. Had all that time with him changed something inside her too? An Shiyu noticed that I was hesitating. And just when she was about to take things even further, I immediately caught her hand. Then I shoved her away. I reminded her that our wedding had already been arranged. I knew perfectly well that it was only 2 months away. But I still couldn't understand what she actually wanted from me. And Shiyu tilted her head back and stared directly into my eyes. From that angle, there was nowhere for me to hide. Every tiny change in my expression was exposed to her. And for some reason, that made me nervous. I had no idea what she was expecting me to say. So I climbed down from the table. I decided it was time to leave. But before I could get away, An Shiyu pulled me right back. I tried to brush it off, insisting that there was nothing left to say. My patience was starting to run thin. So I simply wished her a happy marriage. An Shiyu smiled. But there was something cold hiding behind that smile. She clearly wasn't satisfied. She wanted to know what else I had to say. I couldn't think of anything. Yet the moment our eyes met again, my mind went strangely blank. This could very well be the last time I ever saw her. And suddenly, I realized that I quietly added a few final words. I wished her good health. And I wished that everything in her future would go her way. But An Shiyu still wasn't satisfied. She wanted to know if that was really all. I shook my head and told her I had said everything I needed to say. She gave me another faint smile. Then she stepped toward me. She grabbed my hand. I struggled, but I couldn't break free. Her voice remained strangely calm. She reminded me that I had been the one who chased after her first. I had also been the one who refused to let go once I got close. So she promised me something. She would give me time to figure out what I really wanted. After all, we still had 2 months before the wedding. That was more than enough time for me to decide whether I wanted her or not. But she made one thing absolutely clear. I could never truly abandon her. I told her I wouldn't. I'd already given her that promise once. An Shiyu slowly lifted her eyes. Then she made it clear that this would be the last lie I ever told her. Before I could fully process what she meant, An Shiyu suddenly leaned in and brushed her lips against mine. At that exact moment, the promise between us became real. The next morning, I boarded a flight bound for another city. And just like that, I was gone. I wasn't only leaving my old career behind. I was leaving my old phone number too. I even abandoned every gift An Shiyu had ever given me. Right before leaving, there was one brief moment when I hesitated. I wondered if An Shiyu had actually figured out the truth. But almost immediately, I forced that thought out of my head. Knowing An Shiyu's personality, if she had truly discovered something was wrong, there was no way she could have remained that calm. Half a month passed after I left Jang City. But even after putting all that distance between us, I still woke up from nightmares almost every night. In those dreams, I would find myself back inside that miserable house, where rain leaked through the ceiling from every direction. Only on rare occasions. I would dream about An Shiyu instead, the younger version of her. Back then, she'd always been distant and cold. That was when my father-in-law first ordered me to get close to An Shiyu. Since we were classmates, I was told to build a good relationship with her. From that day onward, An Shiyu suddenly had a persistent shadow following her everywhere. And yeah, that shadow was me. Whenever she needed water, I was there. Whenever she ate, I was there. Even when An Shiyu went to sleep, I would quietly stay nearby. I would even block the sunlight so she could sleep without being disturbed. I followed her around like that for an entire month. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore. She made it clear that she didn't need me doing all those things for her. So I immediately backed off. Honestly, I was pretty embarrassed too. I couldn't even look her in the eye. After an awkward silence, I finally turned around and asked her quietly if there was anything she actually wanted me to do for her. And Shiyu seemed caught off guard by the question. I blinked, waiting for her answer. Then, something seemed to click inside An Shiyu's mind. She suddenly asked whether I actually liked her. I never expected her to hit me with a question like that. My brain completely short-circuited. But before I could even recover, An Shiyu shut me down. She made it clear that she didn't have feelings for me. Back in my sophomore year, An Shiyu was still the girl who didn't like me. And yet, somehow, she eventually accepted the confession I had been carrying in my heart. She finally agreed to be with me. But An Shiyu lowered her eyes. Then she made one thing painfully clear. She could be with me, but she would never truly love me. And the very next day, everything changed. An Shiyu suddenly became strangely affectionate toward me. That was the first time, even as a teenager, that I realized something was seriously off. An Shiyu might look ice cold on the outside, but inside her way of thinking was definitely not what I would call normal. But I didn't care. I loved her nose. I loved her eyes. I loved her lips. Back then, love felt so damn beautiful. I was completely consumed by it, and I stopped thinking rationally. I actually believed we might have a future together. It wasn't until much later that I finally understood the truth. If something is nothing more than a beautiful dream, then sooner or later, you have to wake up. Half a month after arriving in the Western city, I realized I couldn't keep wandering through life in that numb state. So I booked a flight by myself and traveled all the way to Northern Europe. Standing beneath that vast, unfamiliar sky, I finally felt like I could breathe again. I watched the northern lights stretch across the sky while endless grasslands disappeared into the horizon. For the first time in a long while, the weight crushing my emotions finally began to fade. And with $100 million in cash sitting in my bank account, I had more than enough money to live however the hell I wanted. But I reminded myself that I couldn't have everything at once. That became my new rule. So I kept traveling, hopping between different countries and disappearing from the world for another 3 full months. I cut myself off from every piece of outside news. Every day became the same routine. Eat, drink, wander outside, and enjoy whatever the world had to offer. Then one day, while I was heading out, one of my neighbors suddenly asked whether my girlfriend had finally come over. I told him I didn't have a girlfriend. But then he told me something that immediately caught my attention. He'd been seeing a woman standing outside my building. According to him, she had long, beautiful hair. She was around 170 centimeters tall. And apparently, she was extremely beautiful. She was Chinese too, so he had assumed she must be my girlfriend. My expression instantly changed. I could feel my nerves kicking in. The first thought that crossed my mind was that I might have a stalker. My neighbor joked that someone that beautiful probably couldn't be a dangerous creep. Still, he warned me that the neighborhood wasn't exactly famous for being safe. He told me to keep my guard up. And somehow, his warning actually made me nervous too. I had finally escaped at 25, with my freedom back in my hands. I even had $100 million in the bank. If I got myself killed now, that would be the most pathetic ending imaginable. So a few of us sat down and discussed what to do. In the end, we decided the safest option was to stick together. Xiao Ai and Xiao Di were a couple. The reason they had come here in the first place was to check out their future school ahead of time. Then one day, Xiao Bi noticed that I was home alone. He looked at me and invited me to come out with him. He asked if I wanted to join them for some fun. I was still deciding when Xiao Ai started shouting through the phone. She was already demanding to know why I hadn't gone outside. She basically ordered them to bring me along. There was no escaping it. So I packed my things and went out with them. And somehow, our little group ended up heading straight into an overseas masquerade party. I honestly had no clue how they had even managed to get inside, but I had an invitation in my hand. So apparently, that was enough. I held up the invitation, then put on my mask. I was still fumbling around with it like a total rookie. Xiao Bai started impatiently, urging me to hurry up. I told him I was ready. Then I followed them inside. But somewhere between the crowded rooms, I suddenly bumped into someone. It was a woman wearing a fox mask. She turned toward me with a strangely cold smile. Then she laughed. That laugh sounded painfully familiar, and my heartbeat instantly went out of control. I instinctively reached for her, but before I could grab her, she disappeared into the crowd. A moment later, Xiao Bi rushed over to me. He told me to hurry up. The group was already starting a game of truth or dare. But that strange encounter had completely messed with my head. I sat there distracted, barely paying attention to anything around me. Before I knew it, I had already emptied more glasses of alcohol than I could count. Eventually, the bottle landed directly on me. Everyone looked at me, waiting for my answer. Then someone asked when I had experienced my first love. The moment I heard those words, the memory that came rushing back tasted bitter as hell. Xiao Ai noticed that I had gone completely silent. She quickly tried to change the subject. I decided to play along and said I had never experienced first love. That was all. But deep down, there was a trace of frustration. And more than a little bitterness. That woman couldn't possibly be here. She should still be back in China, living her life with Yi Fan. I repeated my answer once again. I had never been in love. As soon as that round ended, I used the excuse of going to the restroom and quietly slipped away. The moment I stepped out of the restroom, someone suddenly grabbed me and dragged me away. I panicked and desperately tried to push him off, but he pinned me down before I could escape. Then, without warning, the lights suddenly went out. The entire crowd erupted into screams. The woman finally let me go and hurriedly apologized. She admitted she had mistaken me for her boyfriend. The next day, I boarded a plane and returned home. That ridiculous incident at the party had completely killed my mood, and I had no reason to stay there any longer. But the moment I got home, I received an urgent call from Yishu. His voice sounded unusually tense. He told me that my mother's condition had suddenly worsened. She had been desperately asking to see me. He quickly added that even Yi Fan couldn't calm her down. So he asked if I could come back immediately. One day later, I was on another flight, heading straight back. When I arrived at the villa by car, an unsettling sense of dread immediately hit me. All the servants who used to fill this place were nowhere to be seen. I hurried inside and called out for my mother. But the moment I heard my own voice echo through the villa, I froze. I slowly looked up toward the person standing at the top of the staircase. A woman stood there wearing a long black dress. Her expression was ice cold. After knowing her for so long, I immediately understood exactly what this scene meant. And she too already knew everything. I didn't dare move an inch. My mind raced through every possible way out. But no matter how hard I thought, I couldn't find a single escape route. So I simply shut my mouth. Then she coldly asked how much the Yi family had paid me. Judging from her expression, she had already figured out the answer. She accused me of selling her out. I could only apologize. She let out a faint, humorless laugh. Her dark gaze slowly settled on my face. Then she asked what I intended to do now. She wanted to know what my next move was. My heart sank. I knew Anne Shi too far too well. She hated being betrayed. And even the people she loved were never exempt from that rule. But what made this betrayal even worse was that I had joined forces with the Yi family to deceive her. To her. That was practically an unforgivable sin. When everything was stripped down to the truth, I knew I was the one who had done wrong. I honestly didn't know what to say. My voice came out almost resigned. I told her that if she wanted to break off our engagement or take revenge on me, I would accept either
Whatever
choice.
she
wanted, I wouldn't resist. But then I hesitated. I thought about everything that had happened after I left for so long. Yifan had often reported his romantic situation to me, and I lowered my eyes. I told her that if she didn't want Yifan's secret exposed, there was another option. I could promise her something. I would disappear from her life forever. With every word I spoke, I could feel her expression growing colder and colder. And by the time I finished, the last trace of fake warmth had completely disappeared from her eyes. There was nothing left. I should have known better than to think I could manipulate Anshitu like this. She suddenly grabbed my hand. Then she slammed it against the wall. She told me that if I had cared about her even a little, I would have known that her marriage arrangement with the Yi family had already been settled months ago. I was stunned. Of course I hadn't known, she pointed out, because I had never truly cared about her. Then she slowly brushed her fingers across my lips. Her eyes locked onto mine as she accused me of never having truly been in love with her. Never being in love? The accusation caught me completely off guard. She bitterly told me that of course I hadn't. After all, I had already been eager to meet another woman. In her eyes, I had already moved on. Only then did I realize what she'd been talking about. I immediately tried to explain that the woman at the party was just Zhao Ning. But Anshitu cut me off and turned her back on me. Her entire demeanor became cold and distant. Then she asked me a question. What would have happened if she had never discovered the truth? What if she had actually married Yi Fan? What would I have done then? My face went pale. She gave me the answer herself. She would have hated me for the rest of her life. After that, I was effectively locked inside the villa by Anshitu. But calling it a prison wasn't entirely fair, because I chose to stay. It reminded me of what happened many years ago. Whenever Anshitu became angry back then, I would silently follow behind her until she finally calmed down. Only this time, I had no idea what Anshitu was going to do to the Yi family. I had no idea what Anshitu was planning to do to me either. Then, 1 week later, I received a call from Yi Fu. When I arrived at the Yi family residence, I found Yi Fu and Yi Fan sitting silently on the sofa. Yi Fu looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. The moment he saw me, he hurriedly stood up. He swallowed his pride and begged me to plead with Anshitu on his behalf. It was the first time in all these years that I had ever seen him openly acknowledge me as his son. During the past week, Anshitu had pushed him into a corner with absolutely nowhere left to run. He had already run out of options. I could only let out a heavy sigh. But before I could answer, Yi Fan suddenly spoke up. He stepped forward, and the arrogant, cocky attitude he usually wore was completely gone. Seeing the shock on my face, he awkwardly looked away. He told me not to look at him like that. He admitted that he no longer had feelings for Anshitu. He would never forget what happened next. Not long after I left, Anshitu summoned Yi Fan to her house. It was the first time she had ever personally invited him inside. Naturally, Yi Fan was ecstatic. But the moment he stepped through the door, that excitement instantly turned into fear. Anshitu stared at him with a terrifyingly cold expression. Yi Fan wanted to leave, but Anshitu politely gestured for him to stay, as if she were the perfect host. She calmly invited him to eat something before leaving. The problem was, there wasn't a single normal dish on the table. There was only one enormous basin filled with mangoes. Under Anshitu's silent stare, Yi Fan could only grit his teeth and finish the entire basin. And before he could even breathe, another fresh batch was brought out. She finally let him go only after he ate until he nearly threw up. As Yi Fan was leaving, Anshitu suddenly stopped him. She spoke only her second sentence of the entire encounter. She asked where I was. Yi Fan knew exactly who she was talking about, and so did Yi Fu. She was asking about the fiancé who had escaped from the marriage arrangement. Yifu finally broke down and admitted that replacing me had been his mistake. Greed had blinded him. He thought he could get away with deceiving everyone. But he swore he never intended to let the Yi family be destroyed because of his mistake. Then he turned to me and begged me to remember one thing. He claimed that no matter what happened, he had always been good to me. He reminded me that he was the one who brought me into this family. He had given me an education and allowed me to live comfortably and worry-free for all those years. Then he dropped the one thread he knew would hurt me. If the Yi family collapsed, my mother would be finished too. He knew exactly what mattered most to me. And that was exactly why I hated him for using it against me. Because ever since I was a child, he was the only person who had given me genuine affection and love. Then I remembered what Anshi too had said, after everything came crashing down. She didn't want anything complicated. She only wanted me. If I married her, she promised that everything would return to normal. When I returned from the Yi family home, I found An Shitsu standing silently in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. Outside, the winter landscape looked bleak and lifeless. The cold scenery somehow made the entire room feel even colder. I stared at her anxiously. For a moment, I didn't even know what to do with my hands. I had finally gathered the courage to face her. But I still couldn't understand why she wanted me to marry her, and Shitsu remained silent. I stepped closer. Then I reached out and grabbed the edge of her clothes. My thoughts were a complete mess. For once, I couldn't even figure out where to begin. I told her she didn't need to threaten the Yi family anymore. If all she wanted was my answer, then I would agree. But a marriage proposal was supposed to come from love. It was something two people who truly loved each other were supposed to choose. And Shitsu immediately cut me off. She turned around to face me. And when she noticed the tears in my eyes, her gaze trembled for the briefest moment. Her expression tightened. Then she looked away toward the distant winter sky. She made it clear that she wasn't marrying me because she loved me. Instead, she wanted me to personally pay the price for everything I had done. She coldly reminded me that I had deceived her for so long. Now she wanted me to experience the pain I had caused her. Only then would it be fair. She looked directly at me as if daring me to disagree. She warned me that I had underestimated just how ruthless she could be. And she too and I went straight to the civil affairs office and registered our marriage. The whole thing happened so quickly that I barely had time to process it. And An Shitsu didn't look the slightest bit happy about it. Not a single person knew what was really going on. And Shitsu drove me to a private hospital and stopped outside the entrance. I looked at her in confusion. She explained that my mother's condition had worsened again. She could only be moved here for treatment and recovery. Then An Shitsu reached over and unfastened my seatbelt. She knew I desperately wanted to see my mother, so she told me she had brought me here for that reason. When I came back several hours later, I found An Shitsu already asleep in the car. I quietly reached for a coat to cover her. But the moment my hand touched her, she suddenly grabbed it. Neither of us moved. I don't even know how long we stayed like that. Eventually, she slowly let go of my hand. Then she simply told me it was time to go home. After that, my relationship with An Shitsu entered a strange new phase. She barely spoke whenever she saw me. Even at night, she slept in the guest room next door. 3 days later, An Shitsu came home drunk. She suddenly barged into my room. I was still half asleep when she grabbed me and lifted me off the bed. I let out a startled scream. Before I knew what was happening, I was sitting on the table. She started ranting that I was her wife now, in her drunken state. She questioned whether that meant she could do whatever she wanted. Then she stared at me, waiting for my answer. My fingers tightened nervously as I struggled to process what was happening. But the moment the words left her mouth, An Shitsu suddenly kissed me. There was nothing gentle about that kiss. It was filled with insecurity, anger, and resentment. After that night, our daily interactions became painfully simple. Aside from sleeping together, An Shitsu treated me like a complete stranger, colder than ice. Several times, I tried to explain everything, But every time, she impatiently shut me down before I could finish. I eventually realized she simply didn't want to hear it. So, for the time being, I gave up trying to explain myself. And somehow, that only made Anshitu's mood even worse. Anshitu's mother discovered our marriage about a week later. She was furious. She had originally planned to arrange another match for her daughter, so Anshitu could move past the betrayal. She wanted her daughter to escape the shadow of being deceived. Instead, Anshitu impatiently tossed our marriage certificate onto the table. She bluntly announced that she was already married. She wanted her mother to understand that this was no joke. If her mother forced her into another marriage, she would be committing bigamy, which was obviously against the law. Anshitu had never been particularly close to her mother. But that didn't mean she would allow her mother to secretly interfere with her marriage. Not this time. Her mother stared at the marriage certificate, wondering who this man was. She opened the certificate herself. The moment she saw my photograph, her expression instantly collapsed. She recognized me immediately as the man who had deceived her daughter. She spent a long time pacing around the house, thinking about what to do. Eventually, she decided to call me herself. She told me she wanted to meet me. This wasn't actually my first time meeting her. I had met Anshitu's mother before, back when she and Anshitu were still dating. At the time, I had at least managed to maintain a decent relationship with her. She wasn't exactly satisfied with me, but she had never interfered with Anshitu's decisions. She simply respected her daughter's choices. Whenever she checked in on me, it was usually just casual conversation. Most of the time, she only wanted to know how my life was going. But this time, Anshitu's mother slowly raised her eyes toward me. She got straight to the point. She didn't know what tricks I had used to convince Anshitu to marry me, but she absolutely refused to accept this marriage. She calmly set down her teacup. She told me anyone could marry her daughter. Anyone except me. She refused to allow a liar to become her daughter's husband. Then I asked her to name her condition. She looked at me with obvious contempt. She reminded me that I had accepted the Yi family's conditions back then. Now she claimed she could offer me far more than the Yi family ever could. The humiliation was suffocating. I sat there feeling completely trapped. Outside, the winter wind cut through the air like a blade against bare flesh. And once again, my mind drifted back to Anshitu. I remembered something from many years ago when we were at Wutai Mountain. Back then, Anshitu was still just a young girl. She had held my hand and led me down the mountain. I had made a wish that day. I believed that Bodhisattva would make that wish come true. Anshitu had grabbed my hand tightly. She promised that we would never let go of each other for the rest of our lives. That memory suddenly became a reservoir of strength inside me. It filled every crack where my weakness had been hiding. I finally raised my eyes and looked directly at Anshitu's mother. I wasn't going to leave Anshitu. Not this time. I'd already given up on him once. I refused to make the same mistake a second time. Those were the words I should have said from the beginning. I should have stopped hiding behind excuses a long time ago. Whether he believed me or not, I genuinely loved him. That part was real. But the moment I finished speaking, the door suddenly swung open. Anshitu rushed inside, moving so fast that I barely had time to react. He immediately stepped in front of me, shielding me from everyone else. Then he confronted the people behind me. He demanded to know what they had said to me. His brows tightened, and the atmosphere instantly turned cold. Then he looked straight at me, wondering why I'd come here in the first place. My father-in-law looked at me, saw how desperately I was clinging to this relationship, and finally understood. He simply smiled and let out a resigned sigh. He knew there was no way he could control me anymore, and she grabbed my hand and started pulling me outside. But before we could leave, my mother-in-law calmly called after us. She reminded me not to forget the promise I'd made to her family. Those words made Anshitu suddenly stop. For a brief moment, I could feel the tension in his hand before he finally walked me out of the house. Only after we had completely left the inn residence did he finally let go. He told me he would have his driver take me home, as if putting some distance between us could make everything easier. Just like that, the warmth disappeared from him, replaced by that familiar cold and distant expression. He said he still had something to take care of. I couldn't let him leave without asking whether he wanted to know what I'd said inside, but he answered impatiently, making it clear that none of it mattered to him. Whatever I'd said, whatever I'd promised, he claimed it was all irrelevant. Then he opened the car door and stepped inside. But I stayed where I was. I was done running away from the truth. And more importantly, I didn't want to let An Shayu keep running from it either. There were simply too many misunderstandings between us. So I reached out and grabbed his hand. His entire body froze. Tears had already started gathering in my eyes, but this time, I refused to hide them. I remembered that day on Mount Wutai. He wasn't the only one who had made a wish there. I had made one too, and I was the one who betrayed that promise. Ever since I was a child, I had known exactly where I stood in my family. I was the forgotten child, the one standing at the very edge of the family circle. My parents had almost nothing. Not money, not affection. Whatever little love they had, they gave to my younger brother. Before I was even 10, I'd already learned what it meant to be unwanted. I didn't even have the chance to attend school like normal children. Everything changed when my future father-in-law found me. Yes, our relationship started as a transaction, but that transaction completely changed the course of my life. For that, I was genuinely grateful to him from the bottom of my heart. So I followed every arrangement he made for me without question. I studied harder than anyone. I did everything I could to take care of my mother-in-law, and I worked even harder to make sure I always looked perfect in front of everyone. Then, one day, my father-in-law gave me another order. Get close to An Shayu. So yes, I approached him because I was told to. And yes, I deceived him. But the feelings that grew between us were never fake. Apart from the little affection I once received from my mother, I'd barely experienced what it meant to be truly loved. Then, for the first time in my life, I experienced a love so intense that it felt like it could burn me alive. I honestly thought I'd finally found something that could last forever. Then my father-in-law came back. And once again, he gave me an order that shattered everything. He wanted Yifan to take my place and marry An Shayu under my identity. Standing before the man who had completely changed my life, I couldn't bring myself to fight back. I had no way to argue with him. And I certainly didn't have the courage to refuse. I'd spent my entire life believing love was a luxury I simply couldn't afford. Survival, security, and my future had always mattered more. At least, that's what I used to believe. I thought if I kept my eyes closed and kept moving forward, I could survive anything. I really thought I could bury those feelings. I thought time would eventually erase the love I'd tried so desperately to suppress. But standing there in that moment, I finally realized how wrong I had been. Snowflakes landed softly on the edges of my clothes. I grabbed An Shayu's hand again. I leaned against his back, finally allowing myself to break down. The tears I'd held back for so long finally fell. I told him the one thing I'd been too afraid to say. I loved him. Not a little, not temporarily. I loved him more than I could explain. And for the first time, I begged him to trust me one more time. But An Shayu still walked away. Before leaving, he only asked me to give him some time to think. Then his car drove straight past me. I stood there with my hands still hanging in the air. For a long time, I couldn't move. A few minutes passed. My legs finally gave out, and I crouched down. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I cried harder than I ever had before. What I didn't realize was that the man who had just driven away had already turned back. An Shayu quietly crouched down beside me. He reminded me that he'd only asked for some time to think. So why was I already crying like everything was over? He sighed, and the coldness in his voice finally softened. When he saw my tear-stained, swollen face, something inside him finally cracked. He gave up pretending he was completely innocent and admitted that he was at fault too. I asked what exactly he thought he'd done wrong. He admitted that he shouldn't have acted so stubborn, and Shayu gently held my hand, and somehow that simple gesture hit me harder than any apology could. Then he confessed that he'd lied to me too. He reminded me of what he'd told me that day. He had claimed everything was just revenge. He said he'd asked my father-in-law to arrange the marriage, only because he wanted to get back at me. Now, he finally admitted the real reason was fear. He was terrified that I didn't love him. As he spoke, he gently touched my face. And even more than that, he was afraid I'd say something that would completely break his heart. My face instantly turned red. He lifted my chin, making sure I couldn't hide from him. There was nowhere left for me to look away. Then he made one thing absolutely clear. From that day onward, I would never be allowed to run away from him again. Whether we lived together or faced death together, he would take me with him. That night, we stayed in the room and talked for a very long time. An Shayu quietly listened as I finally told him everything I'd been carrying inside. When he heard everything I'd gone through after we were separated, The coldness in his eyes disappeared, replaced for the first time by genuine encouragement. He told me that all of it was already behind me, and as I spoke softly, I realized I truly didn't feel that same pain anymore. He hadn't just helped me solve the problems threatening my life. He had also helped me break free from the people who controlled me. That's why I had to apologize for what I'd done to him back then. I held An Shi-yu's hand tightly. But the truth was, I simply hadn't known what else to do. I didn't know how to refuse my family. Back then, I wasn't strong enough to even understand how to say no. An Shi-yu pulled me into his arms, silently telling me that I didn't have to carry that burden anymore. Then he suggested that we go back to Wutai Mountain together. When we returned to Wutai Mountain, the weather was bright, warm, and almost impossibly peaceful. I asked An Shi-yu why he had brought me here. He simply told me that he had come to fulfill a promise he had made. And when we finally came down from Wutai Mountain, he suddenly grabbed my hand. Then he told me that he'd made another wish before the Bodhisattva. I couldn't help asking what kind of wish it was. He pulled me into his arms and promised that he would love me forever. Not just in this life, but in the next one too. And even in every lifetime after that, An Shi-yu would always love me. A promise he swore would never change.